Welcome all to this chat. My name is Jaka. I am currently on the Poplar Union Zoom account. I am in North London and I'm an artist and improviser originally from Slovenia. This is a chat as part of Poplar Union's Outside in Arts Festival that is actually happening next Friday and Saturday. I hope you can all join. I'm going to be here having a chat with some of my favorite vocal improvisers that have managed to join me in an actual in-person recording that happened in July in London, in which we had 3 hours to basically express everything that we felt throughout this year. This is a chat that is supposed to bring together many different people, hopefully, that are interested in vocal improv. And besides people that are going to be speaking, I would like to acknowledge everyone else that practices the art form, anyone else that improvises with voice and does not feel as part of any tradition all around the globe. I'm going to be talking to Bryony Greenhill, Guillermo Rozenthuler, Kate Smith, Marcia Willis, Sylvia Silas, Uran Apak, and I think, did I forget anyone? Hopefully not. I think that's all of us. And I would like to start actually with Bryony Greenhill. So, Bryony, if you would like to unmute. Could you give us your interpretation of what collaborative vocal improvisation means to you, where it comes from, in as few sentences as possible for people that might have never encountered the art form?
Mm. Thanks, Jaka. Thanks for hosting this. And hello, everybody. It's really exciting to see lots of your faces. And Lulu, you've got really long hair. Very wonderful. Um, so, collaborative vocal improv that I guess recently has been called CVI, which I like. Um, the version of it that I teach in practice can be traced back to Bobby McFerrin, who um, his father was an opera singer, his mother a piano teacher, and he's from the black church music traditions of America. And trained as a pianist, and he had this kind of calling one day when he was about 28. He's like, "Oh, I'm a singer." So he goes into a basement for like 6 years and applies everything he's learned from jazz, from gospel, from the spirituals, from music theory. He applies it to his voice and comes out 6 years later just shocking the world with what he's up to with improvisation and voice. And he pulls together a group called Voicestra, which is a vocal ensemble which he leads, and it has a mixture of composition and improvisation. And he leads all the improvisation. And to cut a long story short, some of the members of Voicestra, particularly Rhiannon, Dave, and Joey, start to say, what if we don't have like one guy in the middle leading improvisation? Can we create music together? And Rhiannon, in the early days of her artistic career, she was doing these wild things in the Bay Area and just making like musical mess with lots of singers while people were creating and people were dancing, and it was just all kind of raw. And I suppose because Bobby trained his singers for a year, he said, "Give me your Mondays." For a year, and he just hella trained them all. It brought all these kind of chops and form and listening and structure to the practice. And so this kind of mushy collective music started to get structure, groove, rhythm, shared beat. And so Rhiannon and Dave and Joey, I would say this kind of started in the something like the mid 1990s. They really then, particularly Rhiannon, basically gave the rest of her artistic life to this question of like, how do we improvise together as singers without somebody in the middle telling us what to do. And also she was massively in the women's movement of the 1960s. And that had this ethos of shared leadership, right? It was like, she says, don't put one person in the middle, they're gonna blow it. So how do we share leadership? And so, so I have a lot of teaching from her. And then I guess my corner of CVI is quite therapeutic, and I came together with singers like Shay Nichols, Green Hughes, Christopher Kunch, and like most people in the Bay Area, they'd done a ton of therapeutic training and were like coaches and therapists and what have you. So we ended up taking the art form in a very therapeutic, supportive, intimate direction, sound healing, supported solos, sound paintings. We innovated a lot of forms, which then I started to share with my students, just because we did it and I loved it, and it turned out to be very healing for the students. And so I think we're still learning into, and kind of music therapy master students are starting to follow on our coattails of like, oh, is this a healing? Is this a community healing mechanism through singing together, through this ancient way of singing together? So I suppose, what does it mean to me? It's my spiritual practice, it's my therapy, it's my livelihood. I feel like it's, especially when we, whoever the we is in collaborating, when we get to a place of kind of shared surrender, it does feel like a bigger life energy sort of picks us up like a bunch of leaves and like creates shapes with us. And it's like getting getting in a God shower, or getting in a beautiful waterfall of nourishment. And it kind of, it's like a wind in the sail, it's like you're dancing with something bigger. So it's a really very, very precious thing to me. Yeah. Thanks for the
Thank,
question.
Thank you for opening up all these directions. I'm not sure if we're going to have time to explore them all, but it was really important to see the strength in conviction and in the passion about the art form. And I'm just so excited that we can specifically discuss collaborative vocal improv as a community in one Zoom call. Just for people that have been joining us now, you can all ask questions in the chat, in the Zoom group chat. You can address them to everyone at any point. There's already someone that commented God shower. I think God shower is a really, really beautiful term. I would now like to move to Guillermo. Guillermo, I would like to pose to you a question specifically about the difference between circle singing and collaborative vocal improv. And if you can briefly address the fact that, well, I believe that humans, even before language, have been improvising together collaboratively.
Oh, hello everyone. Very lovely to see some familiar faces and so many new faces. Extraordinary. So I believe that there are certain forms of making music as a collective which involve voice, body, and rhythm, which are very primal, almost like inherent to the nature of being human, and possibly were happening in some form or another before language existed. Definitely before what we know as culture or civilization. So in all the early days of humanity, it's quite I mean, this is not a scientific hypothesis, but it's almost in my heart. It's very clear that people met and had to sound together in order to, I suppose, maintain social cohesion, listen to each other, share, express feelings and emotions, mark important moments in the passing of time. So for me, these forms are very much in the fabric of what it means to be human. And I also discovered them through Bobby McFerrin, who seems to be the person who brought them to the world's awareness. But in a way, when I saw his work, I was reminded of a lot of tribal music that I heard from all over the world, and that these I've heard some of these structures and ways of making music in people who are still living in small communities in isolated places and who have never got into our current, whatever, urban capitalistic alienation. So in the difference between circle singing and collaborative improv is that, as Bryony was saying, in what we normally call circle singing, there is one or maybe a couple of people leading a group of singers and generating the music. In my experience as a leader, even though I will be generating the music comes into the collective and it's floating in the air, very much part of this God shower experience. So it's not the person who leads making up the songs, but more like going with a metaphorical butterfly net and picking them up from the field. And that's what comes out. But let's say that musically, what happens is there's somebody in the middle of the room, in front of a circle or an arc of people, and he or she will be singing very simple parts that are gonna be shared to different people, and everybody will join in. and the level of complexity can vary from very basic to very complex, but the concept is the same, which is that each singer plays a very important part in sustaining the whole. There's no hierarchy between singers. We are all completely equal, including the person who is leading, and the energy and the sound moves across and weaves across. So I hope that's clear. And then collaborative improv is what Bryony was saying, which is, okay, what if you take out of the center of this circle the person who is generating or channeling the music, and let people work horizontally in more like a star-shaped pattern, in a mandala-shaped pattern, to interact and to cross. I mean, it's not straight lines. In my experience, it's more like curves. It's very curvy, very rounded. So obviously you have to, what you have to create is some agreements. You have to create some pre-existing structures that you can depart from, and they can be very loose or very tight. But what you do is you set up a series of rules, very much like playing games. In a way, I think collaborative vocal improvisation is agreed musical games, and then the rest is left out to, well, to life force to manifest itself through the different singers. So am I making any sense with this?
Yes, you are. And I think Bryony wanted to add something or just wave at me saying that she agrees.
No, I'd love to add something. I agree with all that Guille is saying, and I'd say there is as well as structured games and agreeing rules, there is also a free form approach to CVI, which is there is no structure. You know, there's just blank space and listening, and everyone's listening inside for what wants to come. Everybody's listening outside for what's happening, and moment by moment, you're navigating together. So you're not necessarily held in place by patterns. You can then kind of catch this sort of shared consciousness, taking a bit of a journey through the sonic universe. You know, so it's more like the Northern Lights and less like kind of structured, patterned sound baskets. And so there's another aspect of CVI alongside what Guille is saying about patterns and agreements and games. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think my next question is going to be for Kate Smith, but even before that, welcome to all the new people that have joined. I think that recognition that this art form and this sort of music making is humanity's art form that we all hopefully share and can access is really important. And to that, Kate Smith, I know that you have quite a lot of experience from the classical side. You've studied at Guildhall. You've done a lot of different forms of improv. Could you speak a bit about how does this form relate to, institutionalized art forms such as classical, singing, and how have you experienced and how you even view it? Where do you position it? Do you put it in a box? Do you not put it in a box?
Good question. One I wasn't actually prepared for, but I'll take it and I'll run. Yeah, it's interesting because my forays into vocal improv have not come from the Bobby McFerrin side, and actually I was doing comedy theater improv in New York City, and started an improv troupe where we were improvising musical theater together. So that's kind of how I came into it. And then when I was at Guildhall, I did study classical improvisation. So that's going back to not only like the kind of improvisation that you'd have in a piece by Handel or something like that, but also as a musician, can you improvise a prelude or do a fugue or something like that? So in those forms, they have kind of each have their own genre. So you know what a musical theater piece of music sounds like, and you'd know what a piece of Handel or Mozart might sound like, and you're kind of improvising within those forms. What I've really enjoyed over the course of like doing more and more improv and changing with whom I'm singing is that you can really start to open up and find your own voice, what kind of music you like to make, what kind of voice that you'd like to welcome into the space that you're holding through the process of singing with others. So yeah, sometimes it's fun to kind of go along with the genre, and sometimes it's fun to, like Bryony was saying, just let whatever comes up, which is really great because it's really a democratized form. You don't have to be able to sing a musical theater style in order to do vocal improv. You can bring your folk influences, you can bring your jazz influences. All of those are really welcome. And when you're in that room with the other people, you can also kind of play with these. You can choose to go along with something that someone suggests and, you know, say, I'm going to do a very Celtic sound. Or you can also choose to kind of be the devil's advocate. And I really enjoy doing that sometimes, just throwing something in and you don't have any idea what's going to come out, and it ends up sounding like a wild woman in the fields cry thing. Who knows? So I think that's really fun that in this field, all those influences are welcome and can interplay with each other. Did that
Thank
answer
you.
your question, Jaka?
Yes, it did. But I guess in a sense, because you can put so many things into collaborative vocal improv, a lot of the times it gets either diluted in the sense that people perceive it, or kind of put next to another art form because it can incorporate so many different influences. So hopefully later on we can drill a bit more on its actual foundation. At any point, please use the chat to ask questions. You know, some of these answers might sound really music-like and just for people that have studied music. Hopefully that's not the case. So if we're going too much into that territory, please do ask something else, or if you kind of are just, you know, lost in what we're talking about, we would love to hear from you. My next question is actually going to be for Marcia Willis. Marcia, as someone that is not currently a full-time musician, how do you experience what vocal improv brings into your life? And maybe we can also start transitioning into the second part of this conversation, which would be about how can we improvise online. So how was that transition for you within what happened this March and from that point onwards?
Okay, thanks, Jaka. I'd say that for me, this sort of transitioning to singing online in general, fundamentally being quite hard, because one of the things I really appreciate about singing with other people is the experience of, you know, being in the same space, the sort of presence of others, and the physical experience of creating and effectively being enveloped by sound and harmony and that kind of thing. And I think prior to trying some of the collaborative vocal improv spaces, I've also sort of tried a couple of other groups which were different kinds of choirs, basically, and found with those, because obviously for that form you can't sing at the same time because of the delay and the constrictions of technology, but in some senses it was kind of frustrating, because effectively what my experience of doing that in those spaces is of being able to hear the person who's leading, but not being able to hear everyone else. And just, it felt, even if I could see other voices on the screen, see other faces on the screen, felt more like singing on my own. So to find ways of being able to take some of what I learned and experienced in collaborative group improvisation spaces online initially was tricky, but having sort of found ways of being able to apply some of the offline ways of being, and then learning to sort of adjust things to be able to work online. That it's obviously it's not the same thing as being in the room with everyone, but that has for me kind of helped to maintain some of what is sort of fundamental about singing with other people.
And
I think
what
that
is,
answers your second question, but I can't remember the first one too well, sorry.
no worries at all. And what to you is fundamental about singing with other people, especially through improv?
It's, I guess if you could just, it's the with other people, fundamentally. it's apart from how I feel about music or about being with people in kind of other settings. For me, there's something very, very important and very meaningful about being physically present, about making sounds together, about, you know, sometimes those sounds could be like on different parts, but, you know, they're coming together to create, you know, to create something that fits together. And there's something just fundamentally really kind of joyous about being able to make sounds, whether they're harmonious or not, be sort of playful in that kind of setting as well. And additional things that for me are really that I enjoy about vocal improvisation in a group, particularly collaborative vocal improvisation, is it's a particular kind of really deep, really attentive listening, sort of listening together, sort of in the silence for whatever wants to come up, or whatever feels it's going to come up, and whoever's going to open their mouth first, and then listening to different voices as they emerge to create something in the moment. And then also sort of simultaneously listening for what else the music might need in order to, you know, kind of most come alive. That's the best way to put it.
Thank you so much. I think, yes, it was quite brave of at least our community to try and do things online together. And we're going to talk a bit more about that in the second part. I would like to pose a question to Sylvia, and I did see some questions in the chat. I'm going to get to them in a couple of minutes. So Sylvia, most people here, I think they have seen that video of what we did, a little tiny bit of what we did in that recording in July. The full song is going to be released next Friday on Poplar Union's YouTube channel as part of their festival, and hopefully there will be more in the autumn. But you as a jazz singer, can you just take us through a process of how a song like that might arise, and how can you use and connect what you know and what you have learned as a professional jazz singer in this art form?
I think how a piece like that arrives to me is very much, it's very important to arrive in the space together, because what really sticks out in that song for me, listening back to it, is that we were all so together in that space, even though everyone was contributing a different part and people came in at different places. It just felt like the others knew what I'm doing or what I'm feeling. It was just, you know, and I think you can only get to that place once you've had a bit of time to settle in. I think it's very rare to go into a space to improvise, may that be online or in person, and just be like, boom, like deliver the piece, you know. So I think there's a lot of just like getting into allowing yourself, for yourself personally and for everyone else in the room, to arrive. And we always do this in the ensemble. You know, we often share how we feel. That might be in words, or we might share it by just everyone singing a little solo, or by all doing a drone together. And I think these things are so important to tune in, to hear everyone's voice and to kind of pick up on their emotion. And that's what can allow a piece like that to come out in the moment.
Thank you. And would you mind actually answering that question from Curtis in terms of how vocal improv can relate to and enrich someone's songwriting?
Yeah, I thought that was a really cool question, because I think there's so much that vocal improv can do for a songwriter, because, well, first of all, I've always found if I'm stuck with songwriting, as soon as I go into a space where I exchange with other musicians, and that may be instrumental or singers, it just immediately, you know, you're getting other ideas, you're getting influences, you're getting other people's taste. And that's always inspired me. It's inspired the kind of melodies I write. It might inspire the kind of genre I go for. You know, I might write a folk song, but then I improvise with someone that suddenly does something really like Eastern European, and I'm like, oh, wow, this really goes together with what I'm doing, and it just comes out in my next writing session. So just like stylistically, you might be influenced, but also I think what vocal improv does is really, it sharpens your perception for space, like the importance of not just the sound you're making, but the spaces you leave, for the phrase length you produce, and also for maybe the tone you pick. You might still sing the same song that you've written the day before, but you might sing it in quite a breathy sound or in a really twangy sound because another singer, you know, offered that in the shared space. And I think it's incredibly sort of nurturing for me to improvise.
Thank you, Sylvia. My next question is going to be for Uran, and I'm just wondering about the possibility in general of self-expression that improvising, even if by ourselves or with support of others, can give us, and what sort of things might arise from that. You know, just from your experience, what you have found that process does for you, and what does it produce?
Did you say in terms of self-expression, improv?
Definitely.
In terms of self-expression. Hi from Istanbul, first of all. You might be hearing some call to prayer in the background. We are always surrounded in singing here. Self-expression. I've been thinking quite a lot about self-expression and kind of seeing how I can help others express themselves, as well as, you know, finding my own voice and expressing myself. And I don't know, like the latest point in my thinking about self-expression is somehow I'm not that much into self-expression anymore. I feel like the more I kind of get into the art of improvising with my voice, I feel like it's kind of, I mean, I'm sure like everybody who has improvised with their voice has felt moments where they feel like they're just kind of being a channel for something and really getting surprised with what you create and feeling like, where did that come from? And, you know, I'm kind of getting a little bit esoteric with this, but, you know, what is the self? I mean, that question just leads me to that other question, you know, what is your self? Are you the separate self that has like, you know, these memories, feelings, thoughts, and you're just kind of broadcasting into the world your expression, or aren't we all just kind of connected and, you know, the different facets of one bigger self, and somehow by improvising we are able to tune into that kind of connected network of life and somehow just kind of reveal that kind of hidden song that we all can tune into somehow. That's what I think about self-expression at the moment. Yeah.
That was lovely. Thank you so much. I'm gonna now come back to Ms. Bryony, and there are some questions that I'm gonna try to answer first and then incorporate it also in what we're gonna talk about next. So people are discussing in the chat that arriving is really important, and that especially online, after you do a session with yourself or, you know, with others, afterwards you get an intense feeling of emptiness and a sense of grief that we're not in the same space together, and how can we really come down from that experience. I think in this next part for you, Bryony, I would really like to discuss the daily 10 and 6 for people that are not aware of what that project contains, because I think that also relates to another question from Sarah, who said that she doesn't have that much CVI experience, but she would like to try it out. I think that would be a great place to start. So if you can quickly discuss the project that is Daily 10 and 6, and then how can people improvise online, and how can they get into a place where they can do that comfortably, and where do we all draw from when we improvise, to kind of continue the thread of what Uran was saying. So a bit of a void talk for you.
The void. Oh, thanks for your questions, Jaka. I find myself I have some tears really for these questions because especially Sarah's question, like, oh, how can I enter this art form in the time of COVID? It's like saying, I mean, sorry, this is maybe crude, but it's kind of like saying, hey, I'm a virgin. I'd like to lose my virginity. How can I lose my virginity without touching another person? It's like, honey, you can't. Like, you can't. You can't. Sorry if that made people uncomfortable, but there's God, our bodies are together, and sort of Lulu's grief, just like, yeah, this isn't my full humanity, and I have needs as a tribal creature, like I feel like a blade of grass being asked to stand alone, and I'm like, where's my lawn? Like a grass is a tribal plant, and I think we are tribal creatures, and I think CVI is a tribal art form. So I think anything that we're doing online is such a coping with the current situation, because the alternative would be for many of us just to like not see each other's faces, and we're a community of sorts, it would be to just not hear each other's voices, and that would be worse. So we're doing like such a halfway version at the moment, I feel. And yet, I mean, I don't know, Lulu. I don't know how to answer that question about feeling empty online, because I always feel like dancing afterwards. Like it always, I don't have your experience. It always still lifts me up so much to just hear others sing, and to sing in some kind of relationship, even if it's a digitally mediated one. So when COVID struck, I was kind of on the floor a bit, and Tara, who is on this call, she's like my Merlin. She just like whispers ideas in my ear, and I basically do what she says. Basically, everything I've offered to the public was like Tara's idea at one point, and she like whispered it to me. I was like, oh yeah, it's a good idea, and I do it, and it works. So she messaged me. She said, Bryony, she's Greek. She said, I don't think that your students are going to abandon you in this time, and I don't think that you are going to abandon your students. So I think that you need to rise and you need to lead a little and often. So I'm like on the floor going, okay. And so I just did a week of 9 and 5, and kind of half my world's in America. So 5 p.m. in the UK is 9 a.m. in America. So it's like everybody's like start the day with 15 minutes of singing together. And it was fucking great. And it picked me up off the floor, because you have to stand up and lead. You can't do that from being a puddle. So you have to put yourself back together. And I got to the end of the week of that and was like, okay, now I need some help, because that was a lot to do on my own. So I reached out to all these other good people. We've got, I think, all of the daily 10 and 6 leaders in the house, apart from Akeem. I don't see Akeem. And I said, would you like to lead it with me? And they all, to my delight, said yes. So we made it the 10 and 6, because that's more, realistic. And it's been going this whole time, and everybody leads it in their own way. It's 15 minutes a day. It's now ticketed. I think the cheapest ticket is £5 for the whole month. It's 15 minutes. You have to be on time, because we get going right at the hour, and 15, 20 minutes. And it's all kind of things, it's self-expression, it's animal noises, it's prayer, it's humming, it's whatever, it's embodiment, it's whatever the leader feels like leading on the day. But it feels like these like regular tidbits to keep us connected, and also to keep us singing, because we can sort of go into silence with this domestication, when we're home alone. Our voices can kind of wither with underuse. So just keeps them moving, keeps us going, I think, in these challenging times. And we'll be back in September.
That's wonderful. And could you just return to the question about the void, and how can people actually enter a space where they can improvise? How can they connect to it, even if they're not doing it online, even if they're just by themselves, and after this session they feel inspired to improvise? How can they actually do it?
I really rely on a good studio space, because I like resonant spaces, and I like safety and privacy where I can sing anything, any volume, any words, any ugliness, any rage or fierceness or grief or anything. I feel like the void is like, there's the rabbit hole into Wonderland, you know? And it's kind of I think this is my comment. I'm talking a lot about sex, but it feels like an arrival process, an arousal process. You start cold, and you just start like warming up your body, breathing, softening the body, just warming the voice. It usually comes out a bit stiff. Usually your body's a bit stiff. Your voice is it's a bit like half, you know, it's just waking up. You start warming up, just however, moving, breathing, singing gently, taking the voice through the body, maybe a few scales, singing some songs, and then just starting to improvise freely and then abandon, just sing snippets and abandon, snippets and abandon. And at some point, hopefully, you enter. And then you're in the rabbit hole, and then you're being carried by something. Like you're on your singing. The wind has hit the sails and something's happening. I personally am horrible at, I don't like to do it at home. I don't like to do it in the woods. I want a studio, and they're all blooming closed because of COVID. So I don't know what to say to you all, but other people are better than me at doing it at home or doing it in nature. Especially if your ears are under the water. Okay. So, but I think it needs a container where you're not distracted. And it needs a patience with this process of kind of noodling around until you find the rabbit hole and go down it.
Thank you. I think just to read some of the comments, people are also saying that bathrooms are great for improv, apparently.
And being in the bath. Yeah, yeah.
And to me, you know, I love walking and improvising in the forest where I feel like I'm alone. And then usually when there's someone coming, I usually kind of go quiet. And then I go back loud when they pass me, but you know, things like that, all sorts. And just for the people that might have not improvised and might have not heard the term "the void" before, to me that represents a moment when you're silent and you really go back to your breathing and yourself, and you let yourself listen more than anything else, and then just see what arises when you start to either sing or, you know, speak. If you're a spoken word artist, it really does not matter. Or if you want to start, you know, using body percussion, it really does not matter. But it's that process of tuning in with how you feel and where you are in that moment.
Yeah, and the void being a kind of an emptiness and not knowing, where you're not going in with your plans or your intentions. You're just putting all your plans down and listening and entering the emptiness, and then letting the music come from that.
Yeah, people are also saying singing in the car is great. If you have a car, try it out. And yes, to that point, I think whenever we try to improvise with something that we have pre-prepared or we kind of kept in our minds, it usually kind of just dwindles down and it doesn't really come alive, especially if we're doing it with others, which is a really interesting point that probably we don't have time to discuss right now. Kate, yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to add another metaphor that I really enjoy is like going into the well or drawing down into the well. Because like Uran said, I also kind of sometimes have issue with this idea of self-expression, because that can almost be limiting when you think I have to know what I want to say before I can say it. So when you think about it, this is actually a process of like bringing up a bucket of water and you don't know what's inside of it. It's more about just dropping in to something deep and dark and echoey, and you can't quite see where you are, and listening for what is like more of a process of becoming. So a process of being rather than a process of taking something you already know and bringing it out of the well. It's kind of like existing in this unknown space. So yeah, void, well, I like all those metaphors.
Thank you, Kate. And also people are saying that they love singing by the ocean. I think, yeah, any water always kind of gets me going as well. My next question is for Guillermo. I think now I would really like to move into discussing how can we sing with others online. I know you have a lot of experience. I know you've been trying with different people, not just on Zoom, but also on platforms like Jammer, also creating videos through the a cappella app. But I would probably like to focus mostly on Zoom as a medium to improvise with others online. And you can just take us through your, kind of selection of best practices, what people should be aware of. I did receive some questions over email in terms of the technical difficulties, and I would say that I would like to spend this time talking about how can we drop in online rather than, which headphones to use. But I will try to make a post in the Facebook event about the technical side of things. So now, Guillermo, when you speak about improvising with others on Zoom, you can focus more on the creative side of things, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. So very briefly, I was also in a state of shock and dismay when this happened, and all the most valuable things for me, for my body on a daily basis, like coming together with other humans, resonating, feeling other people's voices vibrate in my body, sharing sound, sharing this creative void with other people. I thought, well, how is it going to be? And my first instinct was also to withdraw and to go within. And then some people started reaching out and saying, can we try and do something online? And I took some time to experiment with some friends before I offered something for people who wanted to learn. And what was really astonishing as we started coming together is that our internal attitude and intent, the way we were engaging with each other across the screen, how we were steeling ourselves and expanding our sensitivity to feel other people across the screen, the way we were making eye contact and how we set up the scene to collaborate was very potent. Of course, very different from what happens in real life when a circle of people stand together, but yet very rich. And it almost opened me up to other sensitivities that I didn't know I had, I didn't know other people had. And really deep listening and how, we can really learn to hear, to feel, to perceive. And then there's the other thing that was almost like a gift was to realize what are the advantages of this technology. For example, being able to gather people who are very far away and to be together in the same space and to share a very brief amount of time, which would be completely impractical and impossible if we had to do it in person. And then also the possibility to use mute and unmute so that people can sometimes practice and explore things in their own space and hear someone else but not offer sound to someone else and yet sing with someone else. So in a way, for me, it was a new revelation of what's possible. And I started experimenting with, the obvious way to get around the challenges of Zoom. What it is that we cannot do in Zoom is that what we singers love the most, which is to sing long, prolonged legato tones together with each other and stack beautiful harmonies. That doesn't work. That's rubbish, that's crap. No. Simply because the system cannot cope with it. But what we realize working together is that because it's a conferencing app, the problem with singing in harmony is that the intelligence of the widget that is trying to decide who should be highlighted and who is talking gets scrambled when a lot of people make long sounds together. So the way to unscramble it is to do the opposite, to start working with lots of space and lots of gaps and to create dynamics where sounds are sung staggered or in succession. So as many different ways in which people can be together and share a musical experience while not making many simultaneous long sounds. So this felt almost like a game to try and go around this difficulty and see how we could meet and mingle and listen to each other and gain from this interaction without the possibility to make that which we make in person, which is so fulfilling. And for me, again, it was another revelation was that I feel it's teaching me and other singers to leave more space, to sing less, to work more rhythmically, to understand a co-creative groove as something which doesn't need to be necessarily locked in time, but can be looser, to really experiment with slow and elongated musical forms which don't have this relentless rhythm of the music we are used to, but which are a lot more dreamy and open. So as a general, approach, this is what we've been exploring with a group of people both friends and peers and colleagues, and then I started to share it with some singers. Lots of them are in this room, and I'm very happy to see you. I'm very lucky that we have been keeping working together during all these months. The most important thing when a group of people who never work together come into a Zoom space for me is to come together. We have to find a way to come together, because when we are physically together, it's easier to, well, to arrive to a place of, let's say, energetic connection. But because online is more subtle and more abstract, we really need to find ways to do it, and it is possible. It takes some time, but it is possible, and the difference is palpable. Sometimes the first 5 minutes of a session are a bit disjointed, and then you feel, oh, we're on the same boat now. Hello. So what Uran was saying about not so much looking at it from the point of view of self-expression, but rather looking at it from, okay, what it is in the pool of collective consciousness that we can draw from and give to. So one image I give to the people I work with is like a metaphorical octopus, where each one of us is a tentacle, and we are meeting somewhere virtual. We are all converging somewhere from these tentacles. This has been very, I suppose, effective to give people a sense of us rather than me, even though people are in their private me space. So for me, this dance between us and me, and us that includes me, is very important. This is what it's about, a sense of the collective that includes me. And then for some people who are shy, maybe being in their own space and exploring us from their own space was actually very liberating, and they could open up and sing things that they wouldn't sing in person because they felt safer in their own private space. So I hope this answers your question, Jaka, about the flavor of it more than what things we did, because that for me is what I care for and what I'm passionate about, saying it's possible, keep experimenting, keep exploring, don't get jaded by the negatives.
Okay, before we go to Bryony, I'm going to come back to you just in a second. I would just like to talk about a couple of things that brought out for me. For me, this process of starting to improvise online was a process of learning a new skill, a new language, and talking to different people that were struggling with it. I think it does take time for our brains to adjust to how it feels to be singing with others on a platform like Zoom. And it takes time for us to find that connection in this new virtual reality. And we do have to let go of some pre-existing wishes and wants that we can experience in person, like locking in rhythmically. And that being the thing that is the most satisfying about that experience. And just letting go of other things that might arise as well, and fully experience and fully acknowledge everything that happens in a Zoom setting, such as, weird sounds and how some phrases can be prolonged and that kind of sped up, and background sounds that might usually really take away from the experience of singing with others in person. Also, when it comes to self-expression, singing with people that I have sang with before in person and made a really strong connection has been incredible on Zoom. I think the most wonderful thing that I felt was that we were able to continue to grow together and as individuals. So I think if I would say anything to people that, have small groups that have met in person before, I would just say, try it online and continue this journey if you can, because I think it did take some time, but when we got into groove of things and found specific forms, specifically, trios and duos and even solos that really worked, we were able to progress as a collective and as individuals, and being able to hear a completely new sound from a person that you've known for a year or two, and for that to happen online, for them to keep developing as singers is quite incredible. Bryony, please go ahead.
Thanks, Jaka. Well, yeah, I'd just like to share very specifically three forms that I've found that have really been working, and two of them you and Joanna brought the other night. The first one I would call pattern solo pepper. So it's a trio form. So one person would do a pattern, the second person would solo over it, and the third person would just add pepper. Like it's not as much as an interlocking part because the interlocking doesn't work, but it's just little ba-da-da, da-da-da, pa. You know, it's like these little bits of pepper. So pattern solo pepper. The second is flower and earth. A lot of people know flower and earth is in earth you have usually three people doing harmonic progressions that change one note at a time. So you have these really interesting kind of chord journeys, and that's the earth, while a fourth person solos over the top and being the flower. And you can do that with Zoom if the three earth people are not all always singing, and instead of like long notes, you do what Guillermo and Jaka are saying about like you turn a da, you turn into a da, 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 da. You do little consonants every so often. You don't worry about a regular rhythm, but you just keep on te, ko, because Zoom will pick up the consonant, whereas it won't necessarily pick up. And the last is supported solo, where the soloist begins to sing. And again, this can be a self-expression for that self-expression, but this is, you know, you sing whatever. The soloist begins to sing, and then two or three people form a backing. And again, it's really applying everything that Guille and Jaka are saying about you let go of like strict beatness. Everything we spend so long practicing to share a groove, particularly, it's like, yeah, no, it's not relevant in today's world. We learn how to go into the kind of atemporality together a bit, that the two or three people behind the supported soloist doing, you know, these really simple, gently rhythmic, harmonic patternings to create the support basket for the soloist. So I think there are three collaborative improv forms that seem to be working really well over Zoom.
Thank you very much. And before we go to Sylvia, I would also say, yeah, even just singing solos in succession, it's such a powerful tool, and they don't have to include words. They can be anything, but just being seen online, you know, by others, whoever they might be, can be incredibly powerful. And, you know, but with that, we also have to acknowledge that it usually brings up a lot of internal emotions, because when I first improvised, actually, my first solo on Zoom was in front of Rhiannon and 60 people on a call on the Daily 10 and 6, and that was bloody scary. So, you know, whatever those feelings might be, once you get to the other side of the mountain, it is like a new skill that you then have and can then access and really use for so many wonderful things when you improvise online. Sylvia, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add to what Guillermo and Bryony said. One of the biggest sort of breakthroughs, I think, in our ensemble online sessions was when we stopped trying to stick to a pulse. Like we were like each tapping our pulse and trying to hang on so tightly to what we were creating, and thinking that we would fall into place with the others, and we just wouldn't. And it was so frustrating. And then one day Guillermo said, why don't we just let go of this idea? And our only task is to find a space. So we all make short things that are repeated patterns and leaving lots of space. And then we each try to find a gap and stick to that gap, so that you're never thinking about pulse. You're thinking about one, like let's say I latch on to Guillermo's sound, and I always place my sound just that 1 second after his. And that's how I anchor myself. I relate to Guillermo, and Kate will relate to Jaka. And that suddenly worked. And I was like, okay. So that was a really nice moment when that happened. And I think that we've been using that quite successfully. So thinking of the gap and singing in the gap has been great. And the second thing that for me was really satisfying is something actually very positive that's come out of Zoom. I've improvised a lot before with singers in like ensembles, choirs, and sometimes also jam sessions. And I've always gotten quite annoyed with the constant sound production, and that there was, like, for me, I always wanted more space and I wanted more listening, and I found it quite hard to do this because I think it's we as humans we tend to over give when we're improvising, and we stop listening. As soon as you start singing, you stop listening, or you're listening less. And I think Zoom, because we can't all sing at the same time, has really forced us to listen and to leave so much more space than we would have otherwise. And I think it's actually brought something to the ensemble, you know, that we may have achieved in person as well, but this just really sharpened this sense, and it was very helpful.
Thank you very much. I think Guillermo is going to reply to some of the comments about leaving, but I would just also like him to further discuss and kind of restate what Sylvia was saying about how can we create, you know, Zoom baskets and Zoom things that can support solos and general music making together.
Okay, so what Sylvia was starting to describe is for me what has really opened the new window of how to work together, which is if people can be really connected and engaged and worked in succession, what happens is that you don't share a common meter, but you can still weave between 2, 3, or maybe even 4 people, and in the weave you maintain a certain constancy in terms of when you appear. So for example, when we do a circle song or pattern-based collaborative improvisation, we will be repeating our pattern all the time relentlessly. That's my pattern, I do it, I'm the bass, boom, 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 boom. And what we realized in Zoom is that less was more, and that actually if we sang only some tiny bits of that pattern and then ghosted all the rest but kept the intention and the internal pulse, people would be able to respond to that. So instead of going like that, you will go like dum 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 dum. So you are still hearing the whole gestalt, but you are only externalizing with your voice a part. And the same with patterns which are more complex. Instead of repeating them all the time again and again, you sing them once out and then once in. Once out and then half in, half out, or once out and then 3 times in. So it really grows the receptive side of things. We sing a lot less than we will sing in real life, and I think that is very interesting to practice. You know, it's not the most fulfilling, it's not the simplest thing to do. We sometimes might have more to say, but it is, I found it very powerful. So always in the baskets, for me the 2 things that are paramount are this thing about ghosting and disappearing, and slowing down tempo also. Zoom is not very friend of fast tempi, so slow-paced things, even though they can have they are not completely loose. There is a pulse and there's a steadiness. I found myself doing quintet pieces where I was singing a very slow bass line, almost as if I slowed down a recording. So no, dum 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 dum, but rather dum 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 dum. So a lot of gaps, because that's when the other people can relate and intervene. And definitely more legato than staccato, although when you create baskets of 2 people doing staccato, like what the structure that Bryony was mentioning, we discovered it playing with the trio form, and then we realized that the person in the top part could sing a long melody and we would be able to hear that, and it worked very well. And maybe what we requested for that long melody is that it wasn't constant, that it was long for 20 seconds and then it withdrew and let the bass layers emerge again, so that we don't obliterate each other. There's always a lot of space for people to hear what's happening. So I hope that helps. So it's very expanded, very loose, and very spacious, and slow in tempo. And then I wanted to say one more thing in response to what Jaka said about working in solos, in successive solos, and how strong this can be it in your own private space and being heard by everybody in the virtual room. But also that if people are muted, they can sing along to your solo without being heard. And that can be very rich for them to learn musical material, to experiment with sonorities or pitches or syllables or even lyrics that they wouldn't have come up with. So it helps you to be in response to, even though you are not heard by everyone and by the person who is singing. And then duos are also a very interesting thing to explore in this form, because people cannot sing simultaneously, but they can sing together and sing in response to each other. And I found that this really opened up people to listen more compositionally to what another person is singing and hear the phrases and the ideas with more clarity. Now, I would like to respond very, very quickly to Lulu and the people who are saying, oh, I'm left with this void when I come down. I have felt it a couple of times, and I realized that most of it was based on stories that I had written in my mind about how it should be and how it was not being. So what helped me to be free from that void was to not give energy to those stories, and instead to almost treasure in my body and in my consciousness the beauty of some moments of connection that were very strong, even though they were not in person. They were very strong interpersonal connection, and my body felt it, and I could almost close my eyes and let my body guide me back to there. And that the void, for me at least, it was more of a mental response. It was a mental comparison, and it was a story I wrote about how it was or how sad I was because it wasn't like that. So that's how it was for me. That's what helped me to go back to the body at the end of the session, maybe to lay on the floor and let my body receive all what we had shared.
Thank you very much. I think most of all, this conversation has showed me how complex things that we're talking about are and how much there is to discuss. And I hope this conversation continues. I'm always open to anyone, emailing me, messaging me on Facebook, anywhere, everywhere about this and how can we continue. I know that the Daily 10 and 6 is returning. I know that there are quite a couple of people that do provide vocal improv sessions online. I know there are a lot of hidden groups in all kinds of different countries that do it as well. I would just like to first ask our guest speakers that does anyone have any last burning desires of what they want to add before I conclude this and kind of try to accommodate a soft ending for all of us? You can just raise your hand. Okay. In that case, I'm gonna just invite us all to close our eyes and do a similar thing that we did at the beginning. I must recognize that we have tried to, put a lot of things in this 1 hour of conversation. So I at least feel not a bit of anxiety, but more so excitement. And my, shoulders are quite high, and I feel a bit of pressure in my neck. And just through returning to my breath, I'm gonna first try to return my body. I'm going to try to find groundedness in my feet. Really have them flat on the floor. Maybe wiggle my toes a bit. Really trying to feel the connection to the ground beneath us. Come back to my breath, seeing where I am, and just take quite a couple of moments to acknowledge what we have heard, to acknowledge what maybe we wanted to hear and was not discussed, to acknowledge what singing and connecting with others through singing means to us, to acknowledge how we experienced doing so online, and then to also acknowledge any future plans that we might have. Maybe it is to invite someone for a socially distancing outside. Maybe it is to try vocal improv online or anything else. I would also like to acknowledge that although we are in times that might be tumultuous and bring a lot of things inside ourselves and outside of ourselves, I find a lot of gratitude specifically for being able to sing with others online and what that has brought to my life. And wherever we're from, however we enter this journey, I just invite us to once more, last time, go back to our breath. And then just provide ourselves and our space in which we're in with at least one out breath of sound. That might be a tiny little whisper, a loud scream, a sentence that we want to hear, or anything else. Thank you all so much. I'm in myself, I'm a bit sad that we didn't do that much singing, but hopefully we can continue this conversation. And if people are interested in participating in a Zoom session that features more singing, trying out forms or anything like that, get in touch with me. We're going to try to organize it. Again, the song that you have heard on social media, Please Can I, that was recorded at Soup Studios, is going to be premiered next Friday, the 28th, on Poplar Union's Outside in Arts Festival. And there will be more coming from that session in the autumn. But I'm just so glad that you all made it, that you're all part of it, and to have shared this experience with you all.